Hello everybody and welcome to another review. I'm Timtra and today we're going to talk about Per Aspera, a sci-fi city builder that takes things to a planetary scale. In Per Aspera, you take the role of Amy, an advanced artificial intelligence who has been given the mission to build humanity's latest Martian colony and later to terraform the Martian environment to a point which can sustain Earth life. The game shares a lot of similarities with other base builders, especially surviving Mars. You start out with only a small landing site and have to expand your base to harvest raw materials like iron or carbon from nodes on the map. Once you have these, they can be transported to factories to create advanced materials like circuits, polymers, or advanced parts, which are used to construct even more complex structures. You also have to do things like explore new areas to discover more resources, maintain your structures against wear and tear, and generate electricity. Once you get your first round of Martian settlers, they will generate research which can be used to unlock new tech to improve your base and expand your capabilities. However, unlike surviving Mars, which takes place in a very geographically contained area, Per Aspera is situated at a planetary scale, so you aren't going to be concerned with things like connecting specific water pipes or managing individual buildings within domes, like you would in surviving Mars. For better and for worse, you're mainly focused on fine-tuning the logistics of your mostly automated Martian colony. Roads connect automatically as long as your buildings are within range, springing to life as some part of your AI determines the right path. I really like that effect, by the way. I think it's pretty cool. Power grids and maintenance networks are simple bubbles where everything within the area will be powered or maintained. The minute-to-minute gameplay is therefore centered around placing buildings to maintain the balance of your logistics network. You might notice you're running low on polymers, so you expand out to build some more chemical mines. Now one of your zone needs more power, so you go over and build some more wind turbines. Then you notice goods seem to be getting collected slowly in an area, so you add in another drone hub. While it isn't the most complicated game out there, as the game progresses and adds more systems for you to manage, such as the composition of the atmosphere or the spread of plant life during the terraforming process, it can be quite engaging. Especially in the early and mid-game, I felt some of that just one more turn feeling that you get from Civilization games, as it always seemed like there was something else I needed to do that wouldn't let me put the game down. One thing that I didn't expect going into this game was how much it would rely upon its narrative. The story is set 200 years in the future, where numerous attempts to colonize Mars have failed, and the International Space Agency has sent you, its latest AI, in order to try again. In the last 200 years, it's implied that Earth has suffered a lot of catastrophes, and as a result, countries have been split into two blocks, the Western Oxy-UN and the Techies, a coalition of Asian states. Basically, Cold War II, or 3 maybe. Within this political backdrop, the plotline focuses on discovering the secrets behind the past Mars missions, as well as Amy's own past. I've just got to say that it's refreshing to have a sci-fi story which takes the perspective of an AI which isn't immediately framed as a threat by the storytellers and begins as very benevolent towards humans. The game also has some great voice acting. For example, they got Yang Ya as the leader of the Techies, and Troy Baker, who voiced Joel from The Last of Us, as Nathan Foster, who, as Amy's creator, helps you through the beginning portion of the game. Throughout the campaign, you'll also have to make choices about how you want to handle the colonization project, and also frequently get to choose how to respond to the other characters during dialogue, or during Amy's frequent reflections on what is going on. I generally like these as it gives the game a chance to build Amy up as a character and examine an AI's perspective on these kind of issues. Amy wrestles with questions like, what is more important, the mission or the colonists? Do they as an AI belong to the Oxy-UN who made them, or are they an independent person? Is it okay to go against orders that they think are wrong? Unfortunately, it doesn't feel like these choices matter to the ultimate outcome of the story. From what I can tell, there's only one choice at one point in the game that determines which of the 3 ending paths you'll go down. And you can just save before reaching this point near the end to experience all 3 paths. These choices also sometimes feel like they're manufactured drama as well. For example, there was this one decision I made early in the game that the game seemed to fixate on way too long. At one point you discover a bunch of unused micro-suns, basically nukes, and are given the opportunity to fire them at Mars's ice caps to speed up the terraforming process. I chose to do this, and for some reason Amy and the other characters kept bringing it up long after it was old news. Maybe I'm just nitpicking here, but it felt like a really weird thing to moralize, considering that nukes really aren't going to do long-term damage to the planet or even the colonists on it. Radiation from nuclear blasts decays much faster than from nuclear accidents, and based on my knowledge, it would have decayed to safe levels in a matter of years. And the campaign will take place over a matter of years. Like you can see at the end of my save here, it's been 99 years since the game started. Considering Mars has no life besides some colonists in shelters, which should be radiation proof anyway, considering that Mars is an irradiated hellscape by default, using the nukes shouldn't have been that big of a deal. Of the two modes, campaign and sandbox, I think that the campaign mode is the ideal way to play through the game, as once I completed my first game, I didn't really feel like I would have had any different experiences playing it again in sandbox. If you want to see the different endings, like I said before, you can just make a save before the crucial choice occurs, and then play through a little bit for each one from there. Before I get into some of the negative aspects of the game, I just wanted to touch on the thing that struck me the most from watching the trailers: the UI and the graphic style. The user interface is slick, clean, and unobtrusive, and generally gets the job done in telling you what you need to do. The different map views look great, and do a good job at cleanly highlighting issue areas. The only thing I would suggest are more elements to alert you when something is wrong. For example, instead of making you switch to the electricity view when your power is in the red, why not just highlight the specific grid that is having the issue without needing to fully switch to that view? That would make it much easier to pinpoint the individual small little problems that happen during gameplay. The graphic style is really well done and reinforces the idea that you're an AI looking at the planet. It is detailed, but it's not like a satellite map. It looks more like a traditional map made three-dimensional, kind of like Google Earth. For example, the map is colored along elevation lines, buildings and roads are represented kind of like board game pieces, and when you get forests and greenery later in the game, when zoomed out, they're represented by simple shades and icons. I think that graphic style is generally way more important than graphical fidelity, and this is just another example where a more simplistic style looks really good. Game performance is great in the early game, but when you get into the later game, when you have thousands of buildings and hundreds of bots all working together to move tons of resources around, the performance can actually start to dip. That being said, my PC is quite mid-tier, so your mileage may vary depending on your system. When it comes to teaching the player how to use the various systems in the game, Per Aspera does a decent job. I found most of the buildings and mechanics intuitive enough. The tooltips for most buildings explain what they do pretty well, and most of the time when researching a technology, Amy will pipe up to say why it is useful up to several times. So I didn't find it difficult to figure out what buildings and strategies I needed to use to complete whatever objective I needed. However, I think there are some things which could have been explained better, such as how drones work. Basically, each drone hub can contain a single drone, which once made in a factory is assigned a set of buildings around the hub to manage the resources in. If you build too few hubs, then one drone will have to manage a ton of buildings and things won't get to where they need to be. So these need to be placed pretty frequently. However, this makes transporting resources between these regions, and especially before you unlock hyperloops, pretty damn annoying. Drones will only go into another drone's territory to drop something off at the nearest building and then immediately return. So if you need materials brought in from quite a distance, you'll have to wait for the drones to essentially relay past them between the zones. Considering the drones in each sector have different things they need to do as well, like unloading or loading mines, it might take a while for things to get to where they need to be. While the game does tell you when an area has heavy load, it seems like there aren't many ways to optimize other than upgrading roads and just placing more drone hubs. Drones not leaving their own zone also means you could have one drone practically being worked to death in a heavy load zone while another one just sits there and chills the next zone over. Maintenance drone hubs also work similarly, although like power buildings, they work with an area of effect, repairing any buildings within it rather than having coverage based on the roads. The range for these is pretty small, so you have to keep spamming them over and over, just like the drone hubs, to make sure your buildings will have the coverage to operate. And this isn't insignificant because after a while, the cost of these really start to add up, especially because the maintenance facility requires resupplies of manufactured materials in order to keep producing repair drones. I think if they want to have these kind of systems, they should have made the maintenance and drone towers upgradable. Give the maintenance hub an upgrade path later in the game, just like the factory or mines have, which greatly expands its range and drone capacity so that you don't have to constantly spam them. Similarly, the drone hub could be changed so that you could upgrade it to increase the number of buildings its drones are able to service, as well as add in more drone slots. While not perfect, I think this would reduce a lot of the annoyance that arises from needing to spam these in the mid to late game. The game could also benefit from a way to extend power that doesn't rely on constantly spamming redundant buildings. This already exists when it comes to moving water around with the water booster pump, so it would be nice to have something like a power substation that had a wide range for easily connecting power grids. It would also be interesting to have a special building to allow you to extend roads without needing to create a bunch of buildings that you don't need. For example, if I placed a water pump here, the range of water provision overlaps a lot with the already existing system, so ideally I'd place it out here. But see this white ring? In order for a road to be built, this ring needs to overlap with another building's white ring. So to place it out here and ensure it can be powered, I have to build a chain of redundant buildings and some more power and maintenance facilities. This is the way that the game intends you to make base expansions, but after a while placing similar arrangements of the same buildings just to grab a resource a bit away from your base becomes a bit tedious. Researching hyperloops helps a lot with this, especially with distant base expansions, as they allow you to pretty much instantly move resources over long distances from station to station. But these are expensive, so this chain placing buildings will still be a common thing throughout most of the game. Another major problem with Per Aspera is the absolutely glacial pacing at the end of the game, with the later stages of the terraforming process taking so damn long to finish. For example, the last stage of the terraforming, where you have to decrease the CO2 level that you've built up throughout the game and add nitrogen to the atmosphere, takes so fucking long, and nothing I did seemed to speed this process up. I built tons of biodomes to spread plants that would convert CO2 to oxygen, I imported nitrogen from Titan, I shut down all my CO2 production sources, I built more oxygen factories, and I spammed those burning shelf things that increased the ability of my plants to convert CO2 to oxygen. But despite all of this, the last 6 or 8 hours of my roughly 20-hour playthrough was mainly sitting AFK watching Twitch and YouTube, occasionally building a small extension to my base. I think that some numbers definitely need to be tweaked here to speed this process up. To sum it all up, while I did enjoy most of the gameplay as well as the visual style of the game, I feel like the inclusion of a story really carried the game here. Without the curiosity to see what happened at the end, I'm not sure whether I would have had the drive to actually make it through the snail-like sections of the late game. And this is also coming from somebody who's really biased towards sci-fi stories, so if you're not necessarily as interested in a story like this, you might not have that motivation to continue. This is a tough game for me to give a recommendation on because despite the fact that I did like playing the game at some points, and I really wanted to like the game, I'm looking back at my script and like 70% of it is complaining. That's not exactly a good recommendation. So if you're looking for a relatively simple base builder with a decent story that lets you kick back, then you might be interested in Per Aspera. But if you're looking for a more complicated and in-depth city builder along the lines of surviving Mars or a city's skylines, this probably isn't the game for you. You might want to wait for some more updates to add some more complexity and polish. I do plan to make a mini review for the game's next update, Blue Mars, which is set to release on May 2nd, and add more ocean-related content, so if you're interested, stay tuned for that. Well, that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed, please the algorithm by liking and commenting, and if you want to see more, maybe consider subbing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Within this political backdrop, the plotline focuses on discovering the secrets. Fuck.